Hello, everybody. My name is Matias Toivainen, and I'm welcoming you to my brand new podcast that I'm calling On the Way. Allow me to just introduce myself quickly to begin with, in case you do not know who I am and where and what I come from. I was born into a nation called Finland, which is a nation of just 5.5 million people in Northern Europe between Russia and Sweden. And when I was about 9 months old, my family moved to Kosovo to help that nation in the aftermath of the vicious Balkan War you may have heard of. And after that, I have until now lived in a total of 4 continents in I think 6 or 7 countries. I've also traveled a lot, extensively, in something between 45 and 50 different countries, depending a bit on uh, what territory and at what time do you want to count which one as a country. But in most of them I've been many times, for long times, and usually in quite unique ways. First with my family, then for my curiosity, and later for my work. In my younger days I was a photographer. I was published in several publications, both locally and internationally. I also have a photo book which is called Awakening, Revealing God Through His Creation and Word. It was published in 2020, I think on the same week as the coronavirus chaos entered the world. I think that's the same week that I finished the book, and then it published a couple months later. And now I'm working as a missionary evangelist, mainly in Africa, Europe, and Asia. And so I'm able to say that I have lived quite a unique life. Actually, I don't really know anyone in the world who has lived a life like mine. There are few people who lived a similar childhood. They're called third culture kids. And even fewer who live a similar kind of life as I do now. But I have yet to come across someone with a story that would be similar enough for us to connect on as a whole. And so when I talk about my experiences and my life and what I've seen, experienced, and learned, you're getting quite a unique perspective on the world. And you're getting a very unique blend of experiences that probably no one else who you know has experienced the same way. Now, the purpose of this podcast is not so I can have one more place to preach and one more thing to do. It isn't so that I can have a platform to be seen and heard, and because I need to get my voice out there. I actually have enough of that, more than I can handle already. I've been on sabbatical this whole year from preaching and teaching, and just in the first few months of the year, I already cancelled more invitations and more meetings than I do in a whole typical full year. And I do hundreds of meetings a year. And so this isn't for me to have more time to speak and to share. I have enough time. I have more opportunity that I can handle. However, where I do preach and where I do speak, I'm there as an evangelist. I don't share my own opinions. I represent Jesus Christ as an ambassador of His gospel. And there's no way I'm mixing in anything else with that. I'm preaching the good news of Jesus Christ, His life, His death, His resurrection, and that's it. And I watch that transform cities, individuals, families, communities, and nations. However, there are still other topics in the world that can and should be talked about. I know Jesus called us to preach first and foremost the gospel, the good news of His coming, His life, death, resurrection, and return, but also to preach the kingdom of God. And part of the Great Commission is teaching them to obey everything I have commanded you, He said. So in this podcast, we'll talk about all sorts of things that pertain to the Christian life, but also just life in general, and society and culture, philosophy, Theology, yes. Even some politics. I've never been, well, I have been, but for many years I haven't really been too into politics. I don't really care about politics for politics' sake, but I do care about people, and I realize that some important issues that concern people become political issues. And so it's important that we talk about it, and it's important that we raise our voice, we use our words, and we sit down and we have conversations, we have hard conversations, and we hear each other out, and we look each other in the eye and respect one another and talk. I think it's one of the great revelations, the great building blocks, of course, we all know, of the enlightened West, that we were able to give each other a voice and hear each other out, and this noble term, the marketplace of ideas, where ideas are brought and weighed, and some are given more room than others based on the conversation and the reasoning we have with one another. And there's value in talking about things. And so that's part of the purpose of this podcast. It's important that we talk about important things openly and out loud. And I'll be covering topics from A to Z, topics like war and crisis and how we ought to respond on a personal and on a wider level. I'll be talking about adventure, what it means and how do we live a life of adventure with God. I'll be talking about art and how it can serve the purposes of God, talking about topics like risk and suffering and persecution, hearing and following the voice of God, talking about missions and the mistakes to avoid. I'll talk about what it means to be a son or a daughter of God. We'll talk about money, the protection and guidance of God. We'll talk about prayer and how I'm able to say that most often I get what I pray for. And I'll tell you more about that. We'll talk about courage. We'll talk about the F word, meaning freedom and freedom of speech. We'll talk about demons, what they are and how do we cast them out. Talk about miracles and faith. The challenges and temptations of men, some of which may surprise you. And I hope to have some guests on here with me to talk about women in the ministry and the church. Some guests who are really the most inspiring ladies in the church, maybe in the world that I know. And we'll talk about the calling of God. We'll talk about being a friend of mistakes, and other interesting topics, much more, with many guests, some of whom are well known all over the world, and some of whom are more, quote, ordinary people who you would probably never hear from otherwise, but have interesting things to say. Also, I'll be sharing stories on here that I've probably never shared elsewhere. Not everything I can say, just because of protecting the security of some people involved in maybe some more difficult countries, and protecting my own operations. But I'll be much more open here than I can be elsewhere. I'll also be talking about mistakes and failures, because there's value in hearing about that also. I know I'm an evangelist, which means a proclaimer of good news, and so usually when I'm on a microphone, I focus on good news, I preach good news, I focus on encouragement and strengthening the faith of the people who hear. But there's value in hearing about mistakes and failures too. I remember one time I had a chance to sit down for a lunch with one of the true leaders of modern Christianity in a certain country, and here I was with an opportunity to talk with him about anything in the world and to hear their story and receive inspiration and encouragement and ask questions that I'll never get to ask again. And the first question that came out of my mouth when I sat down for lunch with them was, "Do you ever make mistakes?" And he was a bit surprised, and he replied, "Oh, we make mistakes all the time." And I remember this had a pretty profound effect on me, to hear that from his mouth, to hear this champion who served the Lord with great breakthrough and power and victory for decades, to say that they make mistakes all the time, it released me from the pressure of always having to do everything perfectly or doing nothing at all. And I'll talk about how I've learned and how you can actually become friends with mistakes and thus become immune to the fear of mistakes and all sorts of things. Ultimately, this podcast is an unofficial, unpolished, unprofessional medium for myself to share my heart, think out loud, and impart what I've learned. One of my foundational heart postures in life is towards the next generation. I want to lay my own life on a silver platter, to lay bare all the victories, challenges, revelations, and realizations that have come along the way, as well as the mistakes. And if someone can grab from that something that will help them see God better and follow Him, I want to give away freely what it took me years to dig from the dirt. And so when I'm recording this podcast, I imagine myself around a cozy fireplace, just having a heart-to-heart with my brothers and sisters. I actually have quite a lot of people asking for this. Just in the last year, I received like 40 to 60 individual requests from people asking if they could travel with me, and I would love to do that, and I've tried doing that, and in the future I will. But for now it isn't so simple, because to these young guys and girls, I can't look their mother in the eye and tell them that they'll be completely safe the whole time. I can't usually even give them dates of how long we'll be, and I can't give them a location of where we'll be. This is just the way I operate. It's how the Lord has been leading me until now, in very flexible ways. I can't give them a budget of how much money they'll need. I don't know it myself usually when I leave. I usually don't have the money when I leave. I usually don't know when I'll be back, if I'll be going to places where I can even take them. So it isn't so simple. I hope to do that in the future, but for now I can't. So this will kind of replace that to a small extent. This way I can still share with you what it's like and kind of share the journey with you. On top of that, I receive a lot of requests from people who would like to sit down and hear more stories of the goodness of God and what I've learned along the way. This I also love to do, but I'm not really home a lot, and when I am, I usually even have a chance to see close friends and family maybe once or two times before I go again. And when I do see people, I usually don't really like to talk too much about myself, and yeah, there's been enough on my mind during the actual trip, so I try to focus on what's here, on what's in that place where I am, and see the treasures there. So I don't really dwell with people in conversations about myself and my stories. But to all those people who would like that, this way we can share our journey together, because we're all on the way. We're all on a journey, and if you're a evangelist, a missionary out there, or if you're living in the same city for 40 years, we're all on a journey, and sometimes it's just nice to have some company and hear from someone else how theirs is going. Just find those points of connection and mutual encouragement and compassion and understanding, which makes us feel like we're not in this alone, but we're all on a journey and we're all on the way. And when I talk about something, I try to avoid being that guy in the tidy campus cafe who just read a bestseller about something and now runs a blog on the internet telling the whole world about how the whole world and their lives should work. When I talk about something, I haven't only studied it, but I've also tested it and seen it work in the actual world. You know, this reality that exists outside of your head. So when I speak about, let's say, miracles, you're not hearing from someone who just read a book about it, but from someone who actually has seen almost all kinds of miracles you can imagine. I've seen a dead person come back to life on two occasions. Once in the West, which makes a difference for some reason. I've seen the deaf ears open and blind eyes begin to see. People walk away from their wheelchairs, marriages being miraculously healed, businesses being saved from the brink of bankruptcy. And when I speak of, let's say, loving your enemies, you're hearing from someone who lived a long time in the same room with several of his own bullies and learned to respond with love. Or when I talk of forgiveness, you're hearing from someone who was thrown rocks at, insulted, beaten, pressured just for being the wrong skin color and learned to forgive. If I talk of human trafficking, I'm talking as someone who was actually held, trapped in a room by human traffickers in a foreign country and made it out. Sometimes I'll be talking about, let's say, money, and you'll be hearing from someone who didn't just read a book about it, but has on multiple occasions seen just a few cents, euros, or hundreds turn into thousands or even tens of thousands just by trusting the word and the voice of God. And if I sometimes criticize somebody, it isn't just because, oh, I think I could do that so much better than them, but out of a real compassion, not only for the people who their actions are damaging, but for the person themselves, because I actually want the best for that person. And anybody can write a blog or a teaching on their new MacBook behind their marble desk or mother's basement about anything and share it on the internet. But I share about the tried and the true, that which I've not only researched and studied, but also brought it into the real world and watch it come to life and many times transform real people with real lives in very positive ways. So I've seen and experienced a lot, and there would be quite a bit on my, quote, spiritual resume that many would regard as accomplishments or merits, but actually at the end of the day, I count none of it as merit. My only joy comes from walking with God and being His friend. And I'm on the way. I'm on a journey deeper into the heart of God, deeper into His goodness and His will, and further into the purpose and plan that He has laid out for my life. And regardless of what you do, if it's something similar to what I'm doing, or if it's something completely different, I hope that we're all on the same journey towards the heart of God, His goodness, and the purpose and plan that He has laid out for each of our lives. And I've learned, as someone who enjoys walking long distances through different kinds of terrain, I've learned that sometimes it's nice to have some company along the way. And so we can walk together. We can be on this journey together. And so if what I'm saying sounds interesting to you, hit the subscribe button. Come over and visit the podcast once you see new episodes coming. Just a heads up, now, as I said, I'm actually myself on a sabbatical, and I'm taking some intentional time of rest and reloading with the Lord, which has actually been an extremely beautiful time. So I won't be doing these like every day, not at all. And actually the reason that I'm launching this now is because I want to get the next episode out about now. It's an episode that I think should be released in this time. After that, I will be slower or even completely quiet about new episodes for a few months. So in case you wonder why they aren't coming out for some time, this is the reason. But I'll let you know on my Instagram when new episodes come, so you can follow me there at Matias Toivainen. It'll also be in the description. And you can hit the subscribe button so you'll get the new episodes when they come. The reason that I'm doing this as a podcast and not as, let's say, a show is so I can do this wherever, almost whenever. And so I'll quite often be sharing from different parts of the world in different kinds of situations. And it'll be interesting for myself even to have some of this recorded so I can go back in time and see from where I've come and where I've ended up. I hope that you, as you follow and as we walk on the way, it can be a source of encouragement, inspiration, understanding, compassion, even entertainment, to hear from this guy who's out there in the earthquakes and the tropical storms and the epidemics and the famines and the wars and the terrorist attacks and all this stuff. Yeah, this life gets kind of crazy at times, and life is windy, and I've learned to enjoy it. and I've learned to enjoy the adventure, and I look forward to sharing it with you. So I look forward to posting the next episode quite soon, and so hit the follow button, the subscribe button. Thank you for listening. Keep walking, and see you next time. Grace and peace.